And here we go. In fact, here we go again. Yes, it's time for another look at a remake. Kicking the Seat is going to be doing a lot of these, I think, this year because, well, let me just start off by asking a question totally unrelated to the movie at hand because I've just been thinking about it because I try and plan these shows ahead.
Mm.
Mark, what are we going to do about I Know What You Did Last Summer? Is it a remake? It's like mostly a sequel, kind of, but it's like really that
It
pushing that legacy thing.
it falls into the category, and I don't know if I like to think that Scotty Davis, our good friend Scott Davis, who's been on the Spoiler Room a few times, he coined the phrase requel to
Mm-hmm.
where it is a remake but a sequel, but there's enough familiarity with the film that it could be a sequel, but then you throw in legacy characters, so you know, is it a remake? So he'd call it a requel. So I would definitely call I Know What You Did Last Summer a requel. In that it's kind of a reboot, yet it's also a sequel, kind of a remake, but trying to continue that story. So yeah, it's a requel. And I've always liked that phrase.
I like it too. It's one of those things where I feel like I'm still gonna try and shoehorn in a here we go again for that. Like watching the original and discussing the new version, even if it's not a remake, because I mean it's still called I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Yeah, I
Much like they
mean,
do with Halloween and Friday the 13th and all that nonsense.
yeah, I don't understand the exact logic of them naming it the same thing as the original, but it's supposed to be kind of a sequel. I'm just disappointed in the marketing material not having Hush as the song again for the trailer, because that was what I remember with the trailer the most, was the song and how they used Hush, Hush, come on, babe, come on. And they didn't use like a remake or an updated version of that for the trailer. And I'm just like, how
Hey,
missed opportunity.
we still have 2 months. You
We
know,
do, we do.
they're
That's
probably
true.
working on the hip hop remix of it right now as we speak. Um, I don't want to put that out in the universe, but I'm afraid I
Well,
just
now
did.
you just did, so
Yeah.
it's gonna
Um,
happen.
I have a question. Okay.
Mhm.
How to Train Your Dragon, the 2025 version, came out with a blockbuster $84 million opening weekend, which I feel like it all depends on the momentum and how it does, going forward. But I feel like that might be just enough for them to say, hey, let's do a sequel. So are we going to then do a How to Train Your Dragon 2, which will be the second How to Train Your Dragon 2, because then we're really into Halloween territory with like the Rob Zombie stuff? Or is it going to
Or
be How to Train Your Dragon Kills? Uh, How to Train Your Dragon Ends will be the third one.
the dragons die tonight. No,
Oh my gosh! Yes, that's what this movie was missing. They needed Gerard Butler or Anthony Michael Hall marching through the streets of Burke, yelling, "The dragons die tonight."
man, I would have loved like a Viking, all dressed up in Viking, Anthony Michael Hall with a big, huge red beard and mustache, just going, "Dragons die tonight."
No, as much as I love Anthony Michael Hall, I would not want to see him do a Scottish accent, especially when you got Gerard Butler as a
Yeah,
co-star. So, all right, this is going to be an interesting conversation because I saw the remake it was a one of those mixed critics and public screenings about a week before it came out, and I brought my wife and my youngest. So, folks out there who are familiar with the channel who follow it may have seen the target audience review I did with Luke, who's 8. I'll link that in the description if it's not already down there. But he really dug it. My wife really dug it, but they had not seen the 2010 original animated feature because I failed them.
I was gonna say, wow, okay.
It's one of those things where you mean to see it, you mean to watch
Yep.
it, and just there's so many other things to watch and do that by the time you get around to it, it's like, oh well, the new one's coming out and we've got free tickets, so we'll just go in cold. Now they enjoyed it. I did not like this movie pretty much at all, and that is because I'd only seen the original the one time. We own it, on Blu-ray because it's one of those things that I love the movie so much that I'm like, I'm gonna watch this again someday. I just never got back to it, but it is so, in many ways, shot for shot, at least beat for beat, the original story, that I'm at once grateful that we finally have a remake. One of these live action updates of an animated feature that's faithful, but on the other hand, it's the double-edged sword of it's so faithful that you're like, well, what the hell's the point? Then I went back and I watched the original a couple of nights ago, again by myself because the other folks were occupied. And yeah, I stand by it. Like the original film is 30 minutes shorter than the remake. And I'm like, so what's different? And a lot of what's different is the chasm between animation and live action. You can do a lot more in animation. The cuts are different. The characters move differently. There's just this energy that they try and port over to live action that just for me didn't translate. So I was dreadfully bored by the whole thing, and yet reinvigorated watching the animation. So that's where I'm coming from. Mark, the movie man Krawcheck of Special Mark Productions and the Spoiler Room podcast. See, I got your intro in there.
You did get my intro in there. Thank you. Not that you need to, just some schmuck that you asked, hey, anybody want to be on the podcast? And I said yes. And you're like, well, I guess we'll take you.
Is schmuck Yiddish for very good friend? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm not sure. It could be. I've been called it a lot, so who knows?
So let me, what was your, let's tease me into it, Mark. What do you think of the original How to Train Your Dragon from 2010, and then kind of work that into your thoughts on the new one?
Surprisingly, Krawcheck Home Video does not have the original. I have sequel on Blu-ray, but I don't actually have the first How to Train Your Dragon. Wow. But luckily it's on Max, and I literally a half hour ago finished revisiting the original because I remember when it came out in 2010, I adored the movie. I loved it. I was like, wow, Disney, balls in your court when I watched it. It was one of those that I was like, man, DreamWorks, give me more of this, because I want to, it was something that it wasn't a Pixar film. It wasn't a Disney film, but it was not talking down to kids. It had some great themes. It's a story that can be relatable. It's one of the animated films to where you show father-son relationship, which in all honesty, you don't get that closeness to where the dad and you kind of, the way the characters are portrayed, there's a little more layers than, oh, dad hates son, or son hates dad, just in general, the movie surprised the hell out of me and I loved it. And I enjoyed both sequels, 2 and 3. I watched a couple episodes of the TV show. I thought they were okay, but they were definitely geared towards the younger fare. But I enjoyed all 3 films because there were 3, I believe. And so when they said they were doing a live action, I saw the trailer. I was like, okay, that looks like shot for shot. And so I braved, just for you, sir. Now, I braved $5 Tuesday. It was $6, but we went, since it was discount Tuesday, we went for the 3D. Honorable Son 1 and I.
Okay.
We went to the 3D, which looked fantastic. Just like majority of this film, we ended up having to sit up close because they had it in one of the smaller theaters, so there weren't a huge amount of seats, but even up close with the 3D, it looked really good. The CGI looked great. As my son said, can you really call this a live action remake considering how much was CGI? And I'm like, yeah, you could argue that.
Well, it is different than it is a live action update because you've got very human characters.
Right.
I think where you get the blur of the line is like the Lion King, the Jungle Book, where they don't call it live action. They specifically say it's photorealistic animation, or there's a term for it or something. Yeah.
But
sorry.
But in general, watching it, once I realized exactly what they were doing, I'm like, okay. And I put aside the why are you making this and just took the film by itself. I thoroughly enjoyed the film. That's not to say that I'm just like, and it's part of the reason why I actually didn't do my minute review like I usually do, because I'm like, I've reviewed this movie already. I adored the story, but why did I adore the story? Because I loved the story in the animated version, and it is so, like you said, fairly beat for beat. The major dramatic beats and such are so exactly the same that I'm like, yeah, I enjoyed this. I enjoy it now because and revisiting the animated film, the same thing. I enjoy both stories. It's moving. There's a touching scene between Hiccup and his father during the big climax that I will fully admit makes me a little misty-eyed being a dad myself. I'm like, and you get that in the live action. They hit those emotional beats. And at the end of it, I go, yeah, it was a really good film, but so was the animated film. And this is pretty much the same movie. Now, as you said, because I couldn't believe the original is 15 years old already. I'm like, holy crap, it's been that long. Those who may not have watched the original are like your wife and son. It's introducing them to this story again, which is great. Don't get me wrong, it's great to see the appreciation for the story, but I'm like, yeah, the animated film, there's only a couple changes they made in the live action remake after watching the animated again that I appreciate, but it wasn't enough for the extra half hour.
Well, let's talk about what are those differences, because I might have noticed them too, but they're not coming to mind.
Well, the opening's longer. The opening dramatic action sequence in the
remake, yes,
in the remake, the opening's a lot longer to introduce your characters, whereas the animated is lean and mean in its opening. You get everybody right away, and you could in the live action. They just added for extra flair some of the action scenes and extended a few scenes. What I do like is watching the film. I like what they did with the Astrid character in the live action, because watching the animated one, Astrid is like a character up front and is given stuff to do to a point, and then suddenly she's kind of like just there, and it's not a lot of major changes. It's very small and minor, but it was just enough that I appreciate it. And they did that with the other characters as well. They give him a little extra time to where his buddies, who we get to mostly in the finale, have a little more to do than in the animated film. So it's not just Hiccup's show at that point when he's fighting the big guy and everybody's like, oh, okay, let's follow the, there's a more communal dynamic between the friends in that when they do that in the live action versus the animated film, which I really appreciated. It's a very small change. The other change what they didn't need to do is they showed kind of that dad dysfunction is very popular in the Viking community, because the one Snotlock kid, his dad doesn't appreciate him at all. So we get this parallel between him and his dad, and Hiccup and his dad, which really wasn't needed, because they don't really do a whole lot. And you're like, we're already getting that with Hiccup and his dad. We don't necessarily need a parallel with that, because that's such a strongly written and emotional dynamic between Hiccup and his father, that you don't need the additional, oh, look, here we have it with this kid too. You don't need that. In the animated, they didn't have that, but it wasn't missing. You never felt like this was needed. Like I said, Astrid, watching the animated, I appreciate Astrid and his friends having a little bit more to do in the remake, but that was about the only thing that really I liked added. Otherwise, most scenes are extended. There's a few other scenes that are added that you're just like, they didn't need. They could have trimmed it a bit more. They really could have.
I'm going to disagree on the Astrid thing for the reason that, I mean, I think it just goes to the economy of the entire film, the original versus the remake in general, that whole kind of half-hour difference.
Right.
The reason I think the characters in the original, including Astrid and also the other gang of Vikings in training, the reason it works is because they are, by definition, supporting characters. When you said you liked it because now it's not all about Hiccup. Well, it is Hiccup's story. It's a story about him, and like priorities, or like in terms of importance, it's Hiccup and Toothless and Stoic the dad, and then everybody else in the village, including the friends and Astrid. Okay. Astrid is sort of an object of hero worship and slight romance on the part of Hiccup. And I understand now it's kind of like the modern sickness of like having to explain everybody, and every character has an inner life and something to do. But it's kind of like if you were to remake Buckaroo Banzai and make it 3 hours long because you had to explore the motivations and the desires and the passions of all of the people in his band, that would be terrible. But
Well, no, and I guess maybe I explained it right. It's not so much what they added to Astrid as far as her character is just in the fight dynamic. It actually made sense because the only real change they did, but it was one that I noticed after watching the animated, was in the remake. Hiccup goes, Astrid, you're the better battle minded, which makes sense. For the battle plan, for her to come up a little bit more with directing traffic a little more than Hiccup. And that part made sense. And watching what they do with, the characters, giving them a little extra time to help add to the battle is the part that I liked. It wasn't the extra depth they gave the supporting cat, because we didn't need that. They, like you said, they're the supporting roles. They're the Viking kids. They didn't necessarily need that. But as far as when it came to the fighting, they made just a couple changes, minor ones, that I liked because they made a little bit more sense in that respect. So that, I guess that's what I mean with the change. Otherwise, the dialogue, even surprisingly, I watched the animated, I'm like, wow, they really just kind of pulled that original script and said, here's 20 extra pages.
Yeah, it's nuts. And that's the thing. Like, even if you want to talk about like the training sequences, the training is like a large part of this new movie, and
Right.
it's not in the original. And like
It's the same but trimmed.
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, they show the original training, the original film showed the training like pretty much all in montage. You get like a setup,
Right.
and then like cutting between Hiccup training Toothless in the woods, and then coming back to using the tips that he used, or that he learned on the new dragon threat. Here it's like these scenes go on, like that scene in the maze with the gas and all that stuff that went on for, I feel like, 8 minutes. I'm like, this is 3 minutes of the movie. What are we doing here? The dragons themselves also, in the animation, they're bright, colorful, very cartoonish, and a couple of them looked like the chameleon from Monsters Inc.
Yes.
The ones voiced by Steve Buscemi, which was kind of fun. I don't know if that was a subtle nod at like, hey Pixar, we're coming for you. But in the new version, it looked like we're going to make them ultra realistic. Like, there's nothing cartoonish about them. The only way to differentiate them essentially is their powers, or the fact that one of them has two heads. It was just, I wonder if it's kind of like the comic book superhero costume thing that folks were struggling with in the early 2000s. Like, we can't actually give the X-Men these bright, colorful costumes because no one's going to believe it. I wonder if they thought, we can't make the dragons nice and bright and colorful and realistic. It would look stupid.
Yeah, I would have liked to see a little bit more color in the dragons. I mean, the color in general fit the general color palette of the entire film. I mean, it was a bit more washed out colors. It wasn't, which is a drag. If you saw this first, again, like your wife and your son, if you saw this first, I could see, hey, cool. And then you see the animated, it's like, oh, wow, colors pop in that. And this is a really lean, and you could appreciate that way. Going the other way, though, from the animated to this, everything's muted. I didn't mind it. But then again, I don't mind Zack Snyder films. So take that as you will. Okay. But needless to say, the color palette in general was definitely more grays and blue, dark, muted
Browns.
blues and such, and browns, lots of brown and gray in it. Which
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this, because that was the thing that struck me like right off the bat. And again, I had not seen the original in 15 years, and we saw it on an IMAX.
Oh, nice.
Well, I mean, it was a LIMAX, right? It's the big one, but not like the one that's like 3 buildings tall. And I was wondering, I kind of had the same experience as when you go to see a poorly projected 3D movie, where it's like, is everything kind of muted? And then you kind of take off your glasses and everything's blurry, but it's much brighter. And then you're like, well, what the hell? But this thing is so gray that I noticed when I went back to watch the original, there are moments where they're kind of overcast, or like it's more misty. The
Right.
remake looks overcast from frame one through like the very end. Even the nice bright shiny reveal of the new day where the dragons and the people are all getting along. In the original film, you had a bit of that, but then it was contrasted by specifically when Hiccup would go off the train, toothless, in that kind of like little area. The sky's blue.
Mhm.
Toothless has these giant expressive green eyes, and you know why they're so giant and green and expressive is because the rest of him is almost jet black. He's
Yeah.
the Night Fury. In this new one, I feel like they went so far to make him a realistic dragon that they took away that awesome, just like deep blackness of him.
He wasn't quite deep, but I still think he looked great. Like I said, in the CGI in general in this, especially for any live action remake to come out, shit, I'll say in the last 10 years, at least the CGI looked fantastic in here. The
Yes.
dragons looked far better than I thought they were going to look. Especially when you get like they're flying, and we actually do get very little, but sometimes we get sun, and you can actually see sun reflecting off the wings. You don't get it often, but there's a couple of shots where Toothless is flying through the cave, and there's a couple of shots where the sun's actually on him, and it you'd swear the dragon was real. So as far as the CGI quality goes, it was like, wow, okay, especially coming off of like seeing, Snow White, uh, and even a few other CG heavy films recently this year.
Mark, new rule: don't say the S word on this show.
Okay, I apologize. Please don't ban me from it. But in general, even if it's not just a live action remake of an animated film, just in general, this had really good CGI overall. I was very impressed the care they took into it. And so, but yeah, no, I'll agree that there is a little bit taken away from Toothless, because he's not as jet black in that as what you had in the cartoon. That said, he looked far better than I thought he was going to look, especially with him being a main character, basically the co-star of the film. They got expressions, most of them not as expressive as an anime, but he still had quite a few of the telltale expressions. I was impressed. I could have used a little bit more, but overall, the dragons themselves had to be convincing enough, and they were. But you were missing some of that color differentiation you had in there, especially when you got into the battles, like the opening scene here, where the dragons are attacking the town to get the food. It was a bit hard at times to tell the dragons, like look at them and see them, because it was at night and they weren't as colorful as in the cartoon. Night shots, it was a little harder to tell. And so yeah, I agree, overall it would have been nicer for brighter colors, but I think for what they were doing, it's better than what we've seen done when they tried to do a similar movie like this in the past. So, I mean, there is a positive there.
I think one of my big complaints with this, and I'm glad you brought up that the attacking the village for food, because their primary source of food is the sheep in the village. They and that's, I think, emblematic of the problem here. The original How to Train Your Dragon is an action adventure movie, but it's an action adventure comedy.
Right.
So when they introduce these, and first of all, let's talk about, I'm going to go all over the place here because there's a lot to unpack, but our main star in the 2020 version, Mason Thames, plays Hiccup, and he's good. He does what the part calls for, but he's still kind of a dreamboat with the kind of moppy hair. He's like the hot movie nerd.
He's like the 80s hot movie nerd who's a nerd, but yet, you just change his hair and take the glasses off and suddenly, wow, hottie. My son said the same thing, that the casting of Hiccup, he did not feel outcast enough. Like you look at him, he Hiccup in the cartoon looks like an outcast compared to everyone else. And in this one, not so much.
Right, and I think that is a key for for setting up this character in this movie, because watching the original, it's Jay Baruchel, from Freaks and Geeks, and he sounds like a teenage Eugene Levy on helium. Like he is the definition of the really smart outcast nerd who's kind of better than everybody else, but he also wants to
Right.
fit in. You know, he's
Mhm.
got that kind of
Yeah.
like bullied elitism. But here they try and recreate that with this live action version of Hiccup, but he just looks too hunky. It's almost like when no, I was going to say it's like when Christopher Reeve tries to play Superman, then Clark Kent, but he could really pull it off. He looks like he underwent a physical transformation by taking off those glasses. But this is like trying to convince me that Colin Farrell could play a nerd.
Looking at it, it makes me wish Timothy Chalamet was about 10 years younger, because he probably would have fit it a little bit more than.
No, it's not in terms of the physicality, sure, but it still is that confidence of presence
That too, yeah.
of knowing
Mhm.
that you're super attractive, even if you've got the wrong haircut, because you know that you could go to a stylist and then be Brad Pitt, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Very, very true. Very true. Yeah, no, the casting, I get what they were doing, and his performance was fine. His portrayal of Hiccup felt fine. It's just and it's the fault of what you run into when doing any animated live action version of animated films. There's missing that, as my son put it, you're missing the artistic style of the animated film. You're missing the exaggeration of what you get with some of your animated characters,
That's
which reflects their personality.
That's exactly it. And what I was before I got sidetracked talking about the live action Hiccup, I was going to say
Mm.
the food source, the sheep, in the when you first see the cartoon, you see these kind of giant-eyed, sleepy-eyed cartoon sheep, and you're like, "Oh, that's so cute." And all of a sudden, thunk, it's getting
Thunk.
plump,
Yeah.
plucked out of the air by this dragon and taken away for food. In this new version, it's like, yeah, and they also eat our sheep. And then you just see this sheep.
Ball of sheep. Yeah, just
And
yeah.
it's like there's nothing funny about it. It's more matter of fact, and I feel like this film is a more matter of fact telling of this story, which is not what this story needs. Part of the magic is the humor and that squash and stretch of the animated characters. They kind of try and do that with some of Hiccup's movements early on, particularly in that village scene where he's like running and he's kind of
Yeah.
noodly armed. But then you watch the animated version, and it's Jay Baruchel's narration and his voice in the moment combined with that kind of wiry uncertainty. You're like, yeah, that guy is a ball of nerves who just he's never gonna fit in. It would take a miracle, a winged miracle with
Mhm.
giant green eyes to make him cool.
Yeah, yeah, and that's any of these live action, you run that risk, because the animation, what I always love about animated films, especially good ones like the original How You Train Your Dragon and a number of other really great animated films over time, is because of the exaggeration. It adds to their character, it adds to their personality. You look at that character, you're like, oh, okay, you know. And when you get into humans, you can't quite have that extreme expressionism in the form of your characters, and that's no slight to the performers. Don't get me wrong, I liked everybody just fine in here. I thought
Yeah.
they played their parts well. Don't get me wrong, it's just visually, though, especially if you come from the first version, it's a bit tough because they all look far similar. And in here they don't quite have that expressiveness or that personality that you get out of drawing, just because you're going to be limited by real world physics.
Well, and the other kind of supporting character I think that's done a huge service here is Gobber, who's the kind of the man at arms of the village. He's
Yes.
Stoic's
Mhm.
like tool maker. He's missing an arm and a leg, and in the remake, he's played by Nick Frost, who I love. But I kept thinking that's not Nick Frost, that's Ozempic Nick Frost. I don't know what happened to his face, but he's lost that adorable kind of chubbiness he had in Shaun of the Dead. And I'm not saying he's on Ozempic, but I'm like, he's got that kind of behind the beard and the helmet and stuff. He's got that kind of deep cheeked sag. And I'm like, what is going on here? But then going back and watching the original, I'm like, this is the key difference between the characters, because in the Remake, he's got a meatier part where he's more of a confidant
Right.
to Stoic, and they have more of these kind of like dramatic advice giving and taking kind of scenes where he's more comic relief in the original, to the point where he's got this giant like stone or metal cartoon tooth that pops out and he like hammers it back into his jaw and it's kind of like jutting out, and he's ridiculous, but he has a couple of moments where he, kind of slaps some sense into people when they need it, and that's the perfect balance. But none of that humor, that innate character humor, translates over into the new version. Not that I noticed.
They cut back a little bit. No, he still has his humor, but they do give him more of the best friend of Stoic vibe here, but he's not as, which is funny because it is Nick Frost. And I didn't even realize that was Nick Frost until, I'm like, why does that voice sound familiar? Because I'm looking at him going, he kind of looks familiar, and then I saw I'm like, that was Nick. Okay. All right. I'm in, but I'm like, wow, I didn't recognize him. But they did write him to be a little less comic relief, which is kind of funny considering it's Nick Frost, so you would think you would play to that strength. I did like his scenes with Stoic, though. I like that, they made him kind of the old buddy of Stoic. So Stoic had that guy he could talk to because, to give him that kind of sounding board. But you're right. The humor with his character was definitely more scaled back. It was still there. It wasn't quite as prominent as it was in the original, for sure. But a number of the characters are like that, to where their comic parts are muted, for lack of a better term. They're there, but they're not nearly as forefront as they are in the animated film. They're not quite as goofy, and I think that was just maybe their choice because it's a live action or whatnot. Like I said, even with Snotlock, I think that's how he said his name, but
or is it Snotlout? I want to get this right.
Snotlout.
Snotlout. Yeah.
Snotlout. His character was fine in the animated film, and it was fine here until they started showing, as I mentioned at the beginning, his relationship with his dad, which wasn't needed, because by doing that actually kind of takes away a bit from the attitude that we got from his character in the beginning when we're first introduced to him, as well as the attitude that we had from his character throughout in the animated film. He's just not a kid who's confident or whatnot. No, we give him a reason why he's being a little bit of a more a-hole, but not really. Even in the animated, he wasn't that bad. He was just more of the guy who enjoyed giving Hiccup a hard time, but it's not like he was bullying him to where he was beating the crap out of him or anything. And you didn't need to give him a reason why he was like that in the live action,
because he's a supporting character. He's there as background color.
Well, and you get his character right away. You don't need a reason. It's just his personality. And that's what, at the end of that's what this show is, folks. I apologize. But at the end of the animated one, it makes even Snot's arc a little bit better, because you see him working with Hiccup and the group finally. He's putting his ego kind of aside. It's not he's doing this now and look, he earned the respect of his dad. His motivation is because of his friendship with this group that they've gotten together and bonded over their training, basically this ragtag group of folks. And I think it has a little bit of a different emotional level doing it that way in the anime, where he's kind of gained this camaraderie with this group, even though at the beginning he was like, oh, I'm the best one here. And now he's like, helping them to, hey, look, I'm earning my dad's respect. I like, you don't need both of those going on, which is what they tried to do in the live action, because he is a supporting character, and him enough being, hey, I'm going to listen to Astrid, and you know what? Hiccup just literally rode in on a dragon. I'm going to respect that. Right. I may not like it, but I'm going to respect it, and we're going to go save our village, and be heroes that he wants to be. That's enough that you need. You don't need the additional dysfunctional family at home angle with him.
Well, one thing I want to talk about that I'm not going to rag on. Okay, I'm going to rag on the live action remake all night, but I will say just
okay.
as far, but going back to the heart of the story, which is something that you mentioned, because both films get they retain the essence of what the core story is about.
Right.
And one of the things that I didn't really pick up on until you were talking about something else earlier in our conversation here that struck me as unique about this dynamic between Hiccup and Stoic is we've seen a version of this in like every sports movie and half of the coming of age movies where the dad disapproves of what the son wants to do. Like, I want to go play ball, or I want to play music or something. It's like, no. And then at the end, there's that heartfelt moment where dad shows up to the big game or the recital and he stands in the back and they give each other the knowing wink or whatever. In this one, Hiccup wants to be a Viking. He wants to do what dad wants to do. It's just that dad doesn't quite believe that his son can do it. But
his dad doesn't see it. Yeah.
But he still kind of indulges him. Like he's, Hiccup is working for, Gobber, like building things in the shed. Stoic doesn't have him like shoving crap in the barn or something like that. He's supportive up to a point, and then later he's proud, and then later he feels betrayed because all his life he's been fighting dragons and protecting his people from these monsters that they never bothered to understand. So I liked that dynamic of, no, the son really wants to go into the family business, and it's the dad who's saying no.
That's one of the appeals. Plus, also, you never get the impression, even at his angriest, you never get the impression that Stoic is actually disappointed in his son. Until
he feels that betrayal, but like
until the betrayal, but up until that point, you never get the feeling like, oh my God, he just, in both versions, and Gerard Butler, I'm glad they got Butler back because he really, I liked him in both, both the voice and being able to do the live action. He does the live action Stoic very well. Up until he's betrayed by, realizes his son's friend, the dragons, up to that point, he just has come to terms with who his son is. And, like you said, he placates him. He's like, yeah, you want to train to be a dragon slayer? Okay, fine. Thinking, he's going to give it the college try. He's going to wash out. And Stoics come to terms with that. He doesn't like it, but you realize he came to terms with that. That's why when Hiccup starts being successful because of his training with Toothless, that it's such a surprise to the dad. And suddenly he gets his hopes up, and that's why the betrayal is extra heavy to him. But even when he's angry with the betrayal, and they managed to capture, and I was happy they kept that in there in the live action and in the animated, is there's a wonderful moment to where Stoic gets angry and he pretty much tells Hiccup that he's disowned him. He's not his son. And then he closes the door. And usually in a lot of films, you see the son's reaction and then that's it. But we cut to outside and we see Stoic and he pauses and he realizes he may have overreacted a bit, but then he's got a job to do. But he takes that pause, and Gerard Butler did it in the live action too. He takes a pause and thinks, and he's just like, yeah. Well, I gotta go fight dragons now. I can't deal with that. But at the same time, just by having him that pause and that, and seeing his reaction helps let you know that Stoic is just a dad.
Yeah, and I think that's the disappointment is, I like Gerard Butler as an actor, and I think he does a very good job in both movies. But I think his performance in the animated film is far superior because I don't know if this is because he was a quote unquote younger actor at the time. He was an adult. He was a grown man, of course, or if it was because it was animated or what, but there was a restraint in Stoic. He was much more stoic. And the big booming voice came out when he was like, leading an attack or, when he got
Mhm.
angry. But the rest of the time, he was surprisingly almost aloof. Like a lot of his
Right.
lines were kind of like,
Yeah.
you don't want to do that, son. But in this new version, he's much more Gerard Butler. It's like watching Al Pacino in The Godfather versus Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. You're like, calm
Right.
down, buddy. You're acting more like a cartoon than you did 15 years ago.
That's true. That's true. He was more vibrato, verbose in the live action for sure, and it's probably because he was live action, so he felt like maybe he needed to be a little bit more,
Well,
versus just standing behind a mic. I don't know.
I'm wondering if it goes back to what they did with Hiccup, because when you've got Jay Baruchel, who's very, even in his quieter moments with Dad, he's very talkative, and he's like, "My dad, I've got to go do this dragon. He's my dragon. He's
Yeah.
my friend." It's a very animated voice. You want to contrast that with a more stoic, laid back dad. It's the contrast. But in this movie, you've got a Hiccup who doesn't really have a personality. It's all on the page, and it's not in the performance. Again, he's not a bad actor. It's just he doesn't have the personality, the zest of the voice that came out of his animated counterpart. And so when you've got that almost a flat line, you almost have to bring up, okay, now we got to have Stoic be more boisterous and be more of the animated presence, so that you don't have the two, like, I've got a stoic dad and I've got a nothing son, that kind of balance. And again, I'm using these kind of harsh phrases. I don't mean to, but it's just that these things that I'm watching this movie in the theater, feeling every minute of screen time. Whereas when I went back and watched the animated film, like, this damn thing moves. Like you mentioned, that opening battle, like by the time you get to 20 minutes in the cartoon, you're an hour into the live action remake.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the problem.
Yeah. No, it's one of those where I looked at, I'm glad I watched the live action and I didn't revisit the animated till after I saw the new version, because it was a little more fresh in my mind and I could compare a little bit better. And yeah, there's really nothing wrong at all with the pacing of the animated film. And what was added in the 2025 version really didn't add too much. It was mostly more extended scenes of the exact same stuff that you had in the animated. Like almost they were coming up with a reason, going, "Oh, we could do that," And the quicker opening in the animated made more sense than the longer version of, because the version in 2025, you're like, "Are we at war now?" I'm like, "This is what happens," whereas in 15 years ago, the version we got felt more like a resource strike, and this felt more like it was a regular battle, and that fit, the resource strike fit a lot more with the theme of, hey, the dragons are doing this not because they want to attack, whereas in this version you don't quite get that with the dragons, that they don't necessarily want to attack the people. They just want to get the food and leave.
That is an excellent point. There's no sense of scale in this new version as far as the attacks go. They're all like big kind of do or die, like epic, movie fights. Whereas you're right, in the original, I love that term resource strike. It's a small, it's quick, it's done. And so when you get to the big battle with the mother dragon at the end, that's the drawn out, kind of battle sequence.
Right.
Whereas in this movie, I'd have to go back with a stopwatch, of course. I'm not going to do it because I'll never watch this movie again.
It's longer.
Right.
It's at least 5 minutes longer, I would say. Not quite, but almost 5 minutes longer.
Right. And also that carries over into the flight training sequence with Hiccup and Toothless, when they're like spending lots of time going like over the ocean and through these like canyons and mountains and hills and stuff. I'm like, I get it. I know you're filming this for IMAX, so you got to show it off. But the things you can do with in the animated version of that sequence, where you've got almost like the opening of Star Trek: The Next Generation, where right before the opening credits ended, the Enterprise would like pulse out into warp speed. You got to see that with Toothless and Hiccup, on his back. Whereas in this one, it's like, hey, we're just going really fast.
Yeah, I did like the final battle in the in 2025 version. I liked that final battle quite a bit. A little bit more than I did with the final battle with the mother in the animated one. I didn't mind a little bit long drawn out. I liked the parts where it was actually blowing holes through the wings and you could see that, and you felt like Toothless was actually doing just a bit more damage to the mother dragon than in the animated one, which is a little bit, they didn't focus as much on that. Both sequences are pretty much shot for shot. They're a little bit added. But yeah, I mean, there was no reason for the drawn out scenes. The animated scenes were definitely efficient. They were trimmed. They gave you just enough and they moved on. And you don't have that here. And that's the thing. If you're going to do this shot for shot, which this is pretty much shot for shot.
It's shot for shot with a lot of extra shots thrown in so you can extend the shot.
yeah, pretty much. But I mean, all the shots pretty much from the animated. So if you're gonna do that, then do that. You're adding the extra, but it just felt like extra padding, even for me. I mean, they looked great in 3D. Don't get me wrong, the flight scenes look great in 3D, but after a while, I'm like, oh, it's another flight scene. We've got this.
Well, but that extends to the screenplay as well. There's that one gag where Hiccup is one of the Vikings. I can't remember if it was Stoic or someone else said, like, we needed to be less of this, and and Stoic's like, you just gestured to all of me, and they're like, yeah,
Grabber, what's his name? Gobber did that first. He says it first, right?
Okay, yep. We get that. That's twice in the original film.
Yep,
it happens at the beginning and it happens at the end. In this one, it happens
like four times. Yeah,
they even break the rule of 3 on that. I'm like, it's nice and it's cute when it does the beginning at the end, like, oh, that's a fun callback and it's got a different context now. Now it's just like, oh, you guys really think this is hilarious, don't you? It's not.
Yeah, you didn't have to remind us it. I mean, I like bookend type references in movies. That's what I call them, the bookend references in movies, where you get the reference in the beginning, doesn't show up at all, and then suddenly at the end, and you're like, oh, yeah. and I would have liked, a little bit less, because especially breaking the rule of 3, by the time you get to that last one, you're like, oh, yeah.
Because once you get past 3 and you get into 4, you're like, oh my God, is there going to be a 5? Is there a 6? Am I gonna have to walk out?
Depending on the gimmick, but usually, you don't want to do it more than 3 times. Anybody, especially when we were doing improv comedy, and if you look at any comedy in general, the rule of 3 applies. Don't go over, because unless you do a variation of it after 3, it gets real. You're beating the dead horse. And in here, we don't get a variation. It's literally beat for beat, word for word, gesture for gesture, 4 times the exact same thing. And you're just like, oh, yeah. Well.
Right. I mean, and on top of that, again, going back, I'm not knocking the actor. It's the casting agent or whoever, but it's like, we need to be less of this. I'm like, oh, what? A guy who's one good haircut away from being on every teen magazine ever? Yeah. Wow.
Well, yeah,
I'm just saying it works when you've got the voice of Jay Baruchel and the look of Hiccup in the original movie mixed with the personality of that character. It doesn't work when you've just got kind of the personality on this guy in this new movie.
Well, and part of it too, I don't think it's the performer at all. I think it's the direction. They directed Hiccup to be less awkward, and you needed Hiccup to be more awkward. It really felt like they were trying not to make him as awkward, and I think that was the wrong way to go. You want him to be awkward. You literally want this kid to be so awkward that when you watch him in a situation, it's like my son says, sometimes he doesn't like that so much to where it's tough for him to get through a movie where you feel so awkward for the character in the situation. You're just squirming in your seat. You're just like, oh, dude, oh, that's not the way to, no, and you need that for Hiccup in the beginning to make that arc have more punch at the end.
You know what they should have done? They should have gone for an actual, because I'm sure Hollywood's full of them, an actual kind of nerdy looking character. When you were talking, I was just thinking about Corey Haim in Lucas.
Yeah.
Because Corey Haim grew up to be a very, handsome,
Mhm.
kind of teen heartthrob. But in Lucas, I don't know if he was 11 or 12 in that movie, but he kind of had like the big teeth and the glasses. And he was the nerd who was smarter than a lot of the people that he was around. Because I think the story, I haven't seen that movie in like 30 years, but I think he was like 11 years old, but he was in high school classes. So he was among people who were bullying him. And that's kind of the situation that Hiccup is in this town. I feel like they should have leaned into that and not worried about like, well, we got to have a hunk to put on the poster.
Let's face it. 80s knew how to do nerds proper. Okay. 80s did nerds proper. And I know, cause I was the nerd. It was like,
What?
Yep,
No.
I know. What? Whoa, revelation. No, it's one of those things where, and I get it. I get why, but at the same time, sometimes it's called for to have the extreme nerd look, the extreme awkward look. You to where you look at the person, yeah, that's a nerd. You kind of want that ID. Yeah, it might be a little cruel at times, but for a narrative, for a story, especially if you're going for something of a coming of age type story, like How to Train Your Dragon really is, it makes it more worthwhile to watch that character come into their own, and see people get behind him, rather than, well, he was just kind of awkward, but now he's everybody's, to where you're like, man, that kid was just like, and then at the end you're like, yes, he's got everybody behind him. It just adds that extra little
Right. I mean, and because you can do a lot in like have like a physical transformation in the third act, like where he shows up and he's wearing the kind of the flight suit that he built for
right.
himself, and it's more the confidence that Christopher Reeve taking off the glasses and kind of like arching his spine up just a little bit so he looks like he's a foot taller as Superman, that kind of thing in the performance. Um, it's weird because the original movie was co-directed by Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois. This new movie is directed just Dean DeBlois by himself. But both How to Train Your Dragon, the remake, dethroned Lilo and Stitch, the remake, and Lilo and Stitch was also directed by Chris Sanders and Dean DeBlois.
He dethroned his own film. There you go.
It's wild. It's honestly, I brought some of that skepticism into this movie with me because I'm like, well, you're remaking your own kind of animated source material. Now I understand it takes a lot of work to put any movie together, especially something at this scale. So I wonder if some of these changes of like making it a half hour longer, drawing some of these things out was sort of to make it worth it to himself to come back. I'm like, really? I'm going to make the same movie again? I almost wish they had just done like, because the original film looks great and it's still exciting, but you can also tell it's a 2010 not Pixar film.
Right.
There's a little bit of waxiness in some of the characters and the textures. Imagine doing a Sonic the Hedgehog where, with the outcry with that original character design, they went back and they remade like most of the movie to put in a state-of-the-art character. Imagine a state-of-the-art coat of paint on the original How to Train Your Dragon and just re-release that as a new version.
Do what they've been doing in video games the last 3 years now. I would say 3 or 4 years, maybe 4. Is they've been giving, and it's various degrees of popularity, but they've been giving classic games facelifts and adding to them, like the Final Fantasy VII to be a game, because I Go figure. I also love games. Final Fantasy VII was gorgeous. It was great. It's an iconic game. It's a milestone game. It's put PlayStation on the map basically as far as PlayStation 1 goes. And that story was great, but it had PlayStation 1 graphics. So they've come out with a new version. They did the remastered, and I forgot the exact titles of the newer versions. New versions to where it's the telling of the same story. They've expanded on the story quite a bit, but they've given the graphics an update. But it's still Cloud. It's still, it's still all of the characters you like, but it's given a graphical update. They're given more to do as well in the game, and you can get in the particulars of that. But as far as the look goes, it's the same characters. They just did them with new graphics, new engine, and they could have done that with How to Train Your Dragon. Basically take the movie, take the soundtrack, which, by the way, very happy that they got the original composer back for this, because I think How to Train Your Dragon score is one of the underrated scores that people don't talk about enough because it's freaking gorgeous.
Oh yeah, there's a heroism to it that is just completely sweeping. I'm sorry, in the animated version, I think it's because of the editing and everything that's going on around it in the live action version, where everything's kind of extended, that for me it didn't have that kind of sweeping impact. It was almost like they had to play it 3 times instead of 1.
It didn't quite have it, but then again, that's what you run into 15-year difference in movie making in general.
Yeah.
And it's why movie scores in general, and yes, I'm a big movie score geek, why movie scores in general have taken a hit over the years, and there's far less really standout scores because they tend to get drowned out by all the other sound mixing that they do. And you even have that here in the remake versus animated films, which tend to bring the musical score out more, obviously, because animated films, you bring the score out more, the music becomes far more of another character in animated films than live action. But even modern live action films, they don't mix usually, not always, but they don't usually mix anymore the soundtrack for it to be very prominent in parts. There's very few parts in this new version where the score really fills the audio, fills the screen to where that's all you hear. You don't hear the characters, you don't hear any special effects or sound effects. You just hear that sweeping music like you do in the animated film. That's what you do. Sometimes there's just the music and the visuals. There's no extra special effect, no extra sound effect, any of that. It lets the music fill the frame, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in here we don't have that music, but that's modern filmmaking. Very few modern films. And yeah, I'm going to say both Marvel and DC, if you want to go to comic book films, how many of those are really memorable scores? Not many. You don't even really have that many memorable themes in them because there's such an audio mix nowadays that when you listen to the soundtrack, even by itself, you're like, wait, when was this? Whereas, in a really good score, you can listen to it and go, oh, I know where exactly in the movie this actually is.
Oh yeah, I mean, like past the Avengers. I mean, I can't think of
Right. Yeah, past the Avengers. When you get past the Avengers, the music and I attribute that partly to the cinematic universe. I love Alan Silvestri's scores. I think his earlier stuff was better, but they needed to make the music also sound a little bit similar so it blended into the movies when you watched them, because they're all part of the same universe. So, and in here the score is really good when you can hear it, but it is not as sweeping. It is not as quite as sweeping and in the forefront as it is in its original, which is sad because they add the other elements in there. Now they don't just let the music stand on its own.
Well, from sweeping to sleeping, I want to share an anecdote.
Sure.
Over the weekend, we did on 2 occasions. I started watching the original film. I forgot about this. My wife did watch it with me, but we started at like 9:30 at night on a Saturday.
Oh, okay.
And I was really into it, and she started nodding off. And at one point, I'm like, "You want to just like pause this and go back? We can finish it tomorrow." And she kind of groggily said, "Yeah, I mean, it's essentially just the the same movie we just watched. So yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool. So the next day in the morning, got up and started watching it. And my
Sure.
youngest kind of came out and he's like, uh, oh, can we, yeah, I'd like to watch this. And he got about 10 minutes into it and he's like, can we watch something else? We just watched this. This is boring. And so that is kind of my gripe with the remakes in general
Hmm.
is you could get someone who's either bored by the remake and like, why would I want to watch another version of this, an older version of this, that is something that I'm not interested in the first place or didn't capture my attention, or I just watched this version, the live action film. Why would I want to watch it again when you
Right.
should be like watching the source material, especially if it's a shot for shot thing? Like, go to the original and see what that's all about, because I feel like I don't know if they'll ever watch the original How to Train Your Dragon again unless I sit down and force them like a Clockwork Orange, Ludovico technique this mother. Um, and I wouldn't do that. Okay, maybe I would. But it feels like, you're kind of, especially when it's the same creator and the same studio that's putting this stuff out.
I would say give it some space between them. If you want to watch them, and introduce them to the original, maybe give them a little space between them. Watching them, I can kind of see how they felt like that because they just watched it in the theater. So I can see, especially if that was their first experience, and that's again the big thing with remakes is there's very few remakes or requels, whatever you want to call them, that actually make you go, okay, that added more. That's great. And the real problem is studios are afraid. And we've had this conversation, and I've had this conversation with many of my friends who, yes, I love the obscure cult films. If anyone ever paid attention, would be surprised, I'm sure. I know that's a shock. I love obscure films, but there's a lot of like great, like indie films, smaller budgeted films that never had the chance to really be fully realized to what their full potential because of budget or restraint, or the studio didn't have a lot of confidence in it. But if you watch it, you go, wow, there's a lot of great elements in here. It's just too bad they didn't have a better budget. I wish they would be doing that with remakes, and that go back to those films that, while they may not be popular, they were considered, even some of the cult ones, give them give them the budget that they want, and see what potential they could actually live up to, because I think there's a lot of stories that just, they were very hindered by none other than just production, that they only had so much in the production, so I mean, my favorite movie, one of my favorite horror films of all time, Maximum Overdrive. Literally watched it 31 days during 31 days of horror. I watched other horror movies as well, but I did it as a challenge to myself. But watching that, I go, while I know the director even disowned it, and some people that's campy and not that great, I disagree. I think there's a lot of nuggets of very interesting themes in there. And it would be great, especially with our reliance on technology, to see that maybe get an update. Keep the ACD soundtrack. You got to keep the ACD sound. Who made who? Just keep that soundtrack, okay? But give the rest of the movie maybe a bit more of a modern spin that they weren't able to give because of budget.
Well, but you bring up a good point. When the original came out, I mean, DreamWorks was known for Shrek, and I think
Yeah.
like Mastermind was probably around that time or maybe before.
Yeah.
But it was, kind of goofy, funny kids movies. And How to Train Your Dragon was like them putting their foot down and saying, like, we can do legitimate different kinds of films. We're
Mhm.
going to give Pixar a run for their money because it's going to be funny, but it's also going to be a cool adventure movie. And it really felt like a challenge. Now,
Right.
my question is, where's the challenge in this remake? Aside
It-
from, hey, it's almost like an ego thing for the director of the studio. Like, hey, we can get in on the same, instead of challenging Disney, we're going to copy Disney. Our only challenge is that we can be 100% faithful and not add a bunch of, nonsense like Snow White. Sorry, I said the S word
You said the S
into
word.
it. Right. But it's like, where's the innovation? Where's the reason to care? And I don't see that. And one of the things that bothers me about this is, I don't know if you've seen this yet, but another movie opened up last weekend, wide, Life of Chuck.
I didn't get a
Which,
chance to. The closest place it was showing was an hour away, and I just didn't get a chance to drive
well,
to look.
unfortunately, it came out and did terribly,
Yeah.
to the point where the last I read, like the studio is worried that they're not going to make their money back on it.
Mm.
I hope that's, things pick up, but we're getting deep into summer season. Even though it's based on a Stephen King film, it's got a bunch of stars in it. It's a deeply personal movie that's actually about something, but it's getting crowded out attention wise and at the box office by this giant multi-$100 million remake of something that people saw 15 years ago.
It boils down to the studio, though, and their confidence, and we've seen that, and we've talked about it. I know we've mentioned it before, but it's been very prominent this year. There's a number of films that were decent that have not gotten the marketing they should have, or marketed the right way. Life of Chuck, I knew of it, didn't quite know what it was. I barely saw any trailers for it. It's just like the one coming up this weekend. I mentioned it. It feels like it's getting the Good Dinosaur treatment from Disney. The latest Pixar film is LILO.
Well, that's because the buzz on that movie is terrible.
Well, and I understand, but at the same time, it's like I'm looking at going, I barely saw one trailer for this movie, and it didn't seem that great, but it was like, this is a Disney thing, but you barely see the promotions for it. Life of Chuck, you've barely seen any ads for it. There's some other films as well where I understand some of them are indie films, but people, especially with so much being out there now in streaming and everything, if you don't have a regularly consistent ad, and don't get me wrong, I don't need to see anything more about Spaceballs 2. The Spaceballs 2 teaser, that's all I need. I saw that, and I heard Pullman and Moranis are back. That's all I need. I don't need to see another piece of promotional material for Spaceballs 2 until it comes out. Okay. So as far as that film goes, that's fine. But some of these films need, if you want people to actually see them, you need the buzz. Otherwise, they're going to get buried very quick in all the noise from all the other films and all the streaming stuff coming out. And
you're right. And I think that we're never going to be rid of that, but it's I think it's kind of heartbreaking that the thing that's sucking up the attention and getting the big, marketing and budget push is a remake of something.
Yeah. That almost a shot for shot remake of it.
Right. That it's also a movie that has had 3 sequels and a cartoon show in the course of 15 years. So it's not like something that came out 40 years ago and like no one has any recognition of it in this generation. Right.
I think I'm with you. I think they still would have made bank if they would have did an anniversary release with just updated animation for the same exact movie. Hey, 15th anniversary of How to Train Your Dragon. Only this time it's been updated. It's
like
updated,
you've never seen it before.
Like you've never seen it before with updated animation and such. And, you could even do the 3D animation. Instead of having live action characters, have them just be more 3D versions of the animated characters that you got in the original film. You would have still had people come out for it. And it probably would have cost you less.
Oh, guaranteed it. Yeah.
Because I guarantee you Gerard Butler wasn't probably cheap. Not as cheap as he was when he was voicing Stoic 15 years ago.
Oh, sure. One last thing, and then we're going to get out of here because we're over time. But I'm so glad you were able to jump on tonight and hang out and talk about this movie because it's been a lot of fun. Given a lot to think about. It was Father's Day this weekend, and I just want to share this. This is apropos of nothing, but I had to share this. My youngest, who I must preface this by saying has never seen a Scream movie because I am a good father, unlike my parents who showed me really inappropriate stuff. Right. I was a child of the 80s, so I saw this stuff way too young, and it scarred me for life. But I will say when Scream 6 or 5 or one of those came out, the ads were ubiquitous on YouTube. So when we would like, hey, here, go watch Coco Melon or something, they would show Scream ads on the freaking. So he got used to seeing the Ghostface killer, had no context for anything else, and you get used to, okay, I'm just going to flip the iPad down when this happens. And you're like, yeah, that's a good idea. He made me a Father's Day card with Ghostface on it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was cute. And then on the inside is a giant blood splatter.
I love it.
The dripping blood.
Yes, I love
it. And then in bloody font, it says, "Don't be afraid to celebrate. Happy Father's Day."
That is amazing. That is an amazing card. That warms my horror fiend heart. That is beautiful.
So yes, so folks out there, if you're a fan of watching the target audience videos with little cute Luke in his Burger King crown, this is what's going on inside.
We need Hallmark cards like that. We need more like Hallmark cards like that. Horror themed Hallmark cards. That's awesome.
All right. Well, okay. I think we're gonna get out of here. And
okay.
Yeah, Mark, thanks again for hanging out. Yeah, folks, if you liked this show, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for all that stuff. And Mark, I'm going to give you the license to shill, sir. Go ahead. I'm stealing from the best.
You're stealing from something. I don't know what. I'm horrible at these, but specialmarkproductions.com for all your movie man needs. Our website's there with links to all of our other stuff, the TikTok, I've been trying to do more Twitch stuff again because I'm gaming and I like to play games. And so I'm like, I'm playing the game anyway, might as well stream it. So it's been fun doing that, trying to do that a little more because I don't do enough. We got the podcast and everything, spoiler room. We're finishing up our Spider month, all legs month, which Ian's had the pleasure of being on a couple of, even if he didn't enjoy the films, he's had been on. July is going to be my birthday month, and it's Jaws month. So we're teasing that. We're going to look at all 4 Jaws films. Godspeed with us on that. And I occasionally pop on here when they let me in the back door. And I appreciate being on as always, Ian. Always fun to talk movies. So,
well, my back door is always open for you, sir. Wait, what? No,
that's a different movie altogether.
I know. I had to get that into our child-friendly review of How to Train Your Dragon. So all links to Mark's stuff and also all of Earth's Mightiest Critics is down below. So please check that out. You can also check out the target audience review that I've mentioned a couple of times on here. And next week, we're going to be back with a look at a very different kind of movie, although also in its own way, an update of something that is an older franchise movie, which is 28 years later. Danny Boyle and our Mr. Alex Garland returning to take their series forward. Does it need to be? Is the story over? Does it need to be continued? We're going to get into all of that next week. Same time, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central. So please join us back here for that. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is. Thank you very much. Take care. And I can't recommend this movie. Watch the original. But Mark, you're saying that there might be something for people to go and appreciate, even if only on an aesthetic level.
I think there's stuff to appreciate on this film. Yes. Okay. If you're on the fence about it, you can wait for streaming.
Perfect. All right. Good night, everyone.